Welcome, Susan. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to talk to you about your new book, The Lost and Found Bookshop. But before I do that, let me just introduce Susan to our audience, although they are well versed with your books and yourself. Susan Wiggs' life is all about family, friends, and fiction. She lives at the water's edge on an island in Puget Sound, and in good weather, she commutes to her writers group in a 21-foot motorboat. She's been featured in the national media. From the very start, her writings have illuminated the everyday dramas of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. Her books celebrate the power of love, the timeless bonds of family, and the fascinating nuances of human nature. Today, she's an international best-selling, award-winning author with millions of copies of her books in print in numerous countries and languages. The author is a former teacher, a Harvard graduate, an avid hiker, an amateur photographer, a good skier, and a terrible golfer. Yet her favorite form of exercise is curling up with a good book. She lives on the island in Puget Sound, where she divides her time between sleeping and waking. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you so much for having me and for that lovely detailed interview or introduction. That was great. You make me sound much more important than I am.
Not at all. So one of my actual very first questions is, how many books have you actually written? Because I was looking and it's a little hard to tell.
It is hard to tell. I scare myself when I go on like Amazon or some website that tallies them all up, because there are novels and then there are novellas and short stories and other publications and different like translations and things like that. But I think actual novels that I have written is around 60.
Wow.
Yes, I know. I've been very busy, but I have to point out that I published my first book in 1987.
Oh, wow. Okay. So
So I've
that's a
been
good
at it.
segue. Can you actually go back a little bit? And I know we've covered this before, but tell us how you got into writing and how you started out in this fabulous career of yours.
Oh my gosh, I would talk about an early adopter. I have been a writer since I could talk, since I understood that there were stories. And I actually have proof of this. My mother has saved little stories I would scribble on paper. I couldn't read or write, but I would tell her, write this down. And, God love her, she would write it down for me. And I would tell little stories. So from probably age 3, I was always telling stories. And it was, and I never really quite understood that not everybody thinks that way. I think in stories, I think in beginning, middle, end, and the drama. And, of course, they're all very immature. And so my very first calling in life that I recall in my earliest memories are that I was a storyteller. And so I got serious about writing. Of course, I wrote all through school and college and graduate school, but I got serious about becoming a published writer in the early 80s, and decided that I would write the books that I loved to read. And at that time, it was big, juicy, dramatic historical romances, very politically incorrect nowadays, bodice rippers, they've been called. And I loved those books. They got me through, vector analysis and, deep dives into learning environments and things like that. So that was my soft place to fall at the end of a tough day. And I always thought that I would write that sort of book, the kind of book that takes somebody away from, stress and boredom and things like that. And that's always been my goal. And it's shifted what I've written through the years. But the first book that I sold was a big, juicy bodice ripper historical romance. And it was published in 1987. My very first editor, she's still in the business. Her name's Wendy McCurdy. And I believe she's still with Kensington Books, which published it. So the two of us go way back, but, I've kind of moved along in my career. I published a lot of historical romances. And then I started being really, really drawn to contemporary novels. And I was shifting what I was reading and what I was interested in as a writer and things that I wanted to explore. And so I kind of found a really, really compelling spot for me as a writer that kind of fed my creativity and my interests. And so I write contemporary novels now and have done, for a number of years. I'm not going to say I'd never go back to historicals because I still love them with all my heart and I want to write them. But at the moment, I'm focusing on contemporary novels.
Okay, so just to go back a little bit, you said, so you've been writing your whole life pretty much.
Pretty much.
Was there ever another career path or was it always?
Yeah, definitely. And I give this advice to writers all the time. You need either a patron of the arts, to sort of underwrite you, or you need a straight job. And those can take many forms. Lucky for me, I loved to teach. And so for the first 11 years out of graduate school, I was a teacher. And then I would write in the evenings and in the summers, and I kind of fit my writing around everything else that was going on in my life. And it was one of those tough choices that you make as a writer with dual careers, because you almost always need dual careers. Very few of us instantly, write a book and 6 weeks later it's on the bestseller list, like in the movies. That's pretty much how it happened. Somebody writes a book and then they're on the New York Times and their book is in the front window of the bookstore and they're on Easy Street, but it doesn't usually wind up that way for most writers. So teaching was my job and writing fit in around that. And I did make sacrifices. I had to give up a lot of social time and things like that. Gave up a lot of sleep, but I was always so passionate about writing. It never felt like a sacrifice to me.
Well, we'll ask you a little bit later about your actual, how you write and where you find the time and sort of the way that you make it work. But before we do that, let's actually talk about the book we're here to talk about today. And I have the hardcover and the paperback, and the hardcover came out last June and the paperback is coming out June 1st this year, correct?
You have a copy of it and I don't. I'm dying for it. It is one of my favorite covers. What do you think of that cover?
So funny because we're going to put it on our Instagram and my colleague was like, I'm going to get a yellow dress and I'm going to stack the books in it. And that's how she's going to promote the book. So I think it's beautiful. I love it.
Yeah, I got the yellow dress. I deliberately, I combed through the internet and I found that dress or a similar dress. And there are many on my Instagram, there are many shots of me standing with the books because it's just, it kind of draws me in. And it also harkens back to a book that I had out last year called the Oysterville Sewing Circle. Yep. Did we talk about that?
Yes, we did.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. So the paperback, the premium paperback version of that one had, just the torso of a woman and she's holding a jar of sewing notions in front of her. And that book did really well. And so people tended to be drawn to that. And so the publisher very cleverly sort of echoed that look for the Lost and Found Bookshop. So, yeah.
Well, okay. So bring us into the book. What, I know you don't want to give too much away, but the premise of the book, can you introduce it?
It starts with, on a really, really poignant note, a young woman has unexpectedly lost her mother in a tragic accident. Her mother and her, a man that she thought, was going to be her fiance in one fell swoop in a shocking kind of development. And she's scrambling because she was on a career path of her own. She lived in wine country in California. Her mother was in San Francisco running a bookstore. And suddenly she's inherited her mother's bookstore and also her ailing grandfather, her mom's dad. Her mom was caregiving for her dad. He's elderly and he's having some pretty serious health issues and struggling with dementia. And so suddenly Natalie had to make an about face in her own path and look after her granddad. And she finds herself living above the cutest bookstore you can imagine. If you ever picture yourself opening a bookstore, this is like my fantasy. And so the shop in the book, the Lost and Found Bookshop, pretty much has everything that I love in a bookstore. You know, the big cushy chairs and the crammed shelves and the curated collection where the bookseller, you know, tags the books and says, you know, this is a favorite for this or that. And, you know, this revolving clientele that comes in and out. And, but being a bookstore, it's having its own, you know, financial struggles, which independent bookstores seem to be struggling with. And so Natalie's got that to deal with. So she's a bit overwhelmed. And so how do you find your way when, you know, you've got to pivot in the middle of your life and make a huge life change like that? And what do you do to, you know, either embrace that or resist that? She's very resistant at first, but you know, come to find out it ends up being the right fit for her ultimately after many many conflicts, including two potential love interests. She's got Peach, the contractor who comes and fixes her building, and she's got Trevor, the best-selling children's author who can, in one book signing, like fill her till and pay her rent. And she's got, you know, a whole new set of friends and family. So it's just filled with all the loves that fill a woman's life and all the things that contemporary women struggle with.
What I love most about your books is, so it's got such a big plot, but it's not something that you wouldn't deal with yourself. Like it's like real life stuff, real life problems.
Oh, thank you for saying that. And it really, this one is a real personal book to me because my own mother, who's 90, is with us, and she actually lives with us since the start of the pandemic. And so Grandy, Andrew, his name is Grandpa Andrew, she calls him Grandy. He embodies a lot of the things, and the scenes in his point of view were kind of inspired by my own mom. And I ended up hearing from a lot of readers who are, you know, in their midlife, as I am, and find themselves looking after their elders and trying to fit that into their life. And, you know, elder care is a frontier that we haven't even begun to address as a society. You know, we've working moms, they get a lot of support. We understand it. There's parental leave now, but when it comes to dealing with our elders and how we make our lives and our careers and things revolve around that, there are issues, you know, there are challenges, and it's a labor of love, but it's definitely a lot.
For sure. I thought he was a great character. And I mean, dealing with Alzheimer's and dementia, I mean, so many people deal with that on a daily basis. So I thought that it was a really poignant part of the book.
Oh, thank you. That was, like I said, that was probably the most personal part of the book, that and my book selling fantasy. Those were great. And I'm always one to, and another little personal note that kind of informed the book is that my husband, Jerry, he's a designer, and he has many, you know, he wears many hats. But one thing that he does is he renovates old homes in a little vintage section of a town nearby. And most of the homes are cottages from the early 1900s. And whenever he's ripping into a wall or something like that, he undoubtedly finds something, usually something of zero worth at all, except it's interesting, you know,
Right.
old newspapers, little objects. But in the book, you know, as we dig into her falling down bookstore and open up the walls, she's finding some treasures. And that was inspired by something that I read in passing I think it was in Smithsonian Magazine. And it said that during the Spanish-American War of 1899, the men who were going to be shipped out to the war in the Philippines, which was a Spanish possession, would ship out from San Francisco. And most of them didn't have a home there. And so they would leave their stuff either with a trusted friend, but if they didn't have that trusted friend, they would hide it in the wall of their favorite saloon or their favorite house of ill repute or something like that. And so they begin finding artifacts in the walls and trying to reunite them with the antecedents of these people from long ago, and those stories come into play too. So that's another, and that was a real pleasure to dive into and do that research as well.
Oh, wow, that's so cool. Um, okay, so just a little bit about this book, because it is actually part of a bigger series. It's the Bella Vista Chronicles. Can you talk about whether it's a standalone book or how it ties into the series?
Yeah, it's definitely a standalone, but there was something that I really wanted to do for my longtime readers. I have longtime readers who were really, really fans of The Apple Orchard and The Beekeeper's Ball. And they were two books that I called the Bella Vista Chronicles. They took place in Sonoma County, which is wine country in California. And it also beautiful vintage estate called Bella Vista. And there were, at the end of book 2, there were still some loose threads that I didn't quite wrap up because I have a third book in mind. But what happened, and this is just probably too wonky to go into, but there were big changes in big business publishing, and my publisher shifted from one imprint to a different imprint, different editor, and a different editorial eye. And so they wanted to have, a fresh crack at fresh material from me. So I shifted to writing these standalone single title books, and they've done really well, but I still have those readers in mind, and I have those characters in mind from the Bella Vista Chronicles. And so I thought, we're in San Francisco now, so let's catch up with Tess. She was the main character of The Apple Orchard, and she had a perfect role for the Lost and Found Bookshop because she is a provenance expert. Like you bring her your old antique artifact, and she will do the research and say, well, this is, a medal from, a Dewey medal from the Spanish-American War, and it probably belonged here. And she knew how to trace old things. And she turns out to be a real key character. And it's several years after her book took place. And so I gave the reader what my editor calls Easter eggs, where you hide little bits for longtime readers, and it doesn't distract somebody who's not read those books. It just, it's just a detail in the book. But if you had read those books, you'll kind of recognize, oh, that's right, there was something about her, missing roguish father. And so I kind of added a few Easter eggs about that. And I'm actually doing the same thing in the book that I'm working on right now, because I was so charmed by the setting of the Lost and Found Bookshop, an old historic street in San Francisco called Perdita Street. And I kind of populated the street with interesting shops. And one of them across the street from the Lost and Found Bookshop is a bakery called Sugar. And readers might remember Natalie decides that she needs a coffee bar in her bookshop because it's my bookshop and I would always have a coffee bar. And so she gets her baked goods from the bakery across the street called Sugar. And there's a huge story behind that one too. So that's what I'm working on right now.
I feel like that's just like a mini prize for all your like devoted readers. And then when they come across it, they must love it.
Yeah. And I love writing about it. I think when you spend a year, 6 months to a year of your life or more, which most writers do, with this cast of characters, they become very much a part of you. You think of them and you kind of develop a weird fictional relationship with them. And so it's kind of nice to tweak them at a different spot in their lives and give them a poke and see if they're still alive and kicking. So I love doing that.
That's not the first time I've heard that from an author about their relationship with their characters.
Yeah, I'm not weird about it, but when you put so much creative energy into creating something that feels and looks and sounds as real as you can within, a work of fiction, you do kind of have more. There's always more to the story than is on the page. There's a lot more in my head or in any author's head about, their backstory and their childhood and, what they feared and things like that. And there's not always room to put it all on the page. But it's always there, kind of like the underside of an iceberg or something.
Speaking of characters, let's talk about Natalie for a minute. She's your main character in this book. And I found her at the beginning, she was a little bit unsure and lacking in confidence with her job and whatnot, but she grows a lot. Can you just tell us a little bit, without obviously spoiling anything, for anybody who hasn't read the book yet?
I have a lot of affection for Natalie, but she is not that instantly sympathetic character.
No.
She's not, you don't fall in love with her right away. She's kind of tentative. She's a misfit in her job. And I kind of toyed with that whole concept through the book where and it's something that I think about when somebody is in their right place in their life. They project a kind of energy that's very positive and confident and things like that. And Natalie definitely lacks that, but she doesn't know it. She is a misfit in her life. She's chosen a career that's super, super stable because her mother was a bit flighty and had the bookstore and didn't stay on top of her, her bills and obligations. And she had and she went through a very uncertain childhood because of that. And so she's kind of gone to the opposite extreme and told herself, I'm going to have this very super stable career in corporate America. And, I'm going to be very predictable. And so she's following this path because she feels obligated to, but there's something bothering her. And I tried to show that in what she wore. We were talking about the yellow dress on the cover earlier. I'm kind of glad because in the beginning, she's very buttoned down. She's very corporate. The girls at work who hate her manage to sort of humiliate her at a big moment in the office, and she just doesn't fit in. But she's one of those people who needs kind of a kick in the pants to kick her out of her comfort zone and say, you know what, you need to go on a journey. And I remember plotting out, I was picking pictures probably off the internet and putting them on Pinterest of the various outfits that Natalie would wear, because I think we as women tend to dress for each other and for ourselves, not necessarily for the guys. They don't care what we wear, but we always remember what we wear at a certain time in our life. And so she was very buttoned down in the beginning, and then she sort of experimented with some other things. She would try to dress like her mother, more like the flowy, unstructured gypsy look and of the Bay Area, and then like the white shirt and the sneakers and things like that. And ultimately, she had to kind of find her way into feeling comfortable in her own skin. And so you can kind of track her journey through that. And the other thing I loved about writing about Natalie is she was a person, she's in her early to mid 30s, I think, and she has already made some life choices and it's really hard to back off from something that you believe so keenly, at a certain point in your life. And suddenly it's like, no, that's wrong. And I think people in this phase, sometimes they lose their marriage or their job or their relationship or something like that. And that really kind of gives them a kick in the pants. And one thing that I really believe is that a big life change is really unsettling and can be really, you can go through a depression or you can, but ultimately, I've never seen anybody regret a huge change that they made in their life. Not if they embrace it with their whole heart. And hopefully she embodies that in the story.
Well, I certainly think 30s, at least in my own experience, have been the most like traumatic decade so far.
Yeah. But they are, and they were for me, big moves, big career moves, physical moves, relationship moves, all of that. Some people are having kids and that's huge. And so it's kind of a turbulent time. And I love that phase I've loved every phase of my life, but in terms of writing about it, like I wouldn't write about my my personal life right now because it's super boring, which is awesome.
Like that's great.
Rather well, but it's more interesting in fiction, I think, to find somebody who's on their journey still.
I love that you said that. I can relate to that so much, that when your life is boring, it's like awesome. That's what you want.
Yes, I know. Yeah, I love drama in my fiction, but not in my life.
Agreed, agreed. Okay, so this book is actually about books as well. Can you discuss that a little bit? Have you ever written a book like this?
You know what? I have not, and it's funny that I haven't because I've always wanted to. I've always wanted, fantasized about. I did write one book called Lakeshore Christmas about a librarian, and I think she was a children's librarian, so it wasn't quite the same. But Natalie in the book gets to be a book evangelist. Being in the girly book club, you know this. You love that feeling. There's nothing that is more gratifying to me when you give somebody a book and they're like, "Oh my God, I loved it," And so I got to use books that I have loved in the Lost and Found Bookshop, and most of the books that are in there are books written by writers who are friends of mine or writers that I really, really admire. And so it was really fun to give them a shout out. Particularly Gail Sukiyama. She wrote The Color of Water, and she lives in San Francisco, and she's a good friend, but I haven't seen her in ages. And her book, The Color of Water, and my book, The Lost and Found Bookshop, were published on the same day last year. And so it was fun to do that. And I made up the bar, the cocktails named after novels and things like that. So it was just such a pleasure to kind of mine through my most favorite things. And there's a slogan that I say in the book, and they actually printed it on a tote bag. Natalie says, "There is a book for everything." Mm-hmm. And so I tried to carry that theme out by, whoever would come in, they're not sure what they're looking for. And that's one of the things I think we don't always do it with a purpose. We don't always say, "I must go in and get this particular book and then leave," which is the difference, I think, between online book buying and buying from the bookshop in person. Is you'll look over and you'll get distracted and say, "Oh, look at that, I might need that book or that book." And so it's I hope that we never lose that, about a bookshop. So it was really fun to put some of my old and new favorites in there.
Well, as a book lover, and our community is full of book lovers, we've read a couple of other books about that incorporate recommendations, and so we always really love them. And then we always talk about the recommended books as well.
Yeah, well, I should point out, my publisher created a really cool book club kit, and one of the pages of the book club kit for this book lists all the books that are cited in the Lost and Found Bookshop. So you don't have to highlight it or try to remember it. If you want to check it out, it's there. So they can go to susanwiggs.com, and somewhere in there's the Lost and Found Bookshop Reader's Guide.
Okay, for
and
the
it's
social
just a
media,
PDF. You can look at it.
Sorry, I was just going to say, for the social media, I'll make sure I include the link below.
Oh, that'd be good. Yeah, because they made it really fun. They made a coloring page.
Cool.
They did the list of books, and then of course the usual discussion questions. And I think there's a couple of good recipes in it too. So if you're hosting a book club or something, hopefully not virtual for too much longer, you can always bake something up and serve it to your book club.
Okay, so my last question before we get into sort of like discussing your process is about your setting, and that's in San Francisco. Well, you have a little bit of wine country in there, but you also talk about San Francisco because that's where the book shop is based. Can you just discuss why you chose San Francisco and how you did your research?
Yeah, every single book I've written takes place in a place that I love to go. A lot of times, if I'm lucky and if I have time, I can go there in person and spend a good deal of time there poking around and kind of feeling my way through. And San Francisco is a city that I don't know super, super well, but I know it well enough to write about it, and I love it. It's just one of those cities that's so distinctive. You know, some cities have just a really, really powerful character, and San Francisco definitely has that. They've got hills, and they've got water, and they've got parks and historic districts and modern, you know, skyscrapers and everything in between, bridges and you know, thoroughfare. It's just there's no end to the charms of San Francisco. And so I made up as charming a street as I could think of, and kind of centered it there, and really just kind of let my imagination go. I love going there. I don't hate the weather. Some people think that it's awful. They think it's just, you know, fog, rain, and then scorching hot some days, but I love it there. And so I really wanted to bring it to life for the reader. And also because of the character's journey, it was a place that she had fled, and she had to go back to it. And so I'm a fan of stories where the character has to come home to something in order to resolve something from the past, which she definitely has to do. So I loved doing San Francisco. And then the other thing, selfishly, and this is where, you know, the pandemic trauma came in. I think we were planning my book publicity tour for this novel in February of 2020. And they were saying, what shops do you want to go to? How do you want your book tour to look? And I was picturing such an entertaining book tour. I said, we're going to fly me down to San Francisco and have a book launch at, you know, a author friendly store down there, and then rent me a car, and I will drive my way up the West Coast, stopping at independent bookstores all along the way for the first like week or week and a half of the book's release. And that way the indie bookstores could, you know, have, you know, the first week sales of that book. And I was going to end in an independent bookshop near my town that had just been opened by an author friend of mine. And her books are in the Lost and Found Bookshop. Her name is Susan Wiggs, and she's a really, really gifted children's author. And she bought a bookstore, and she opened her bookstore in February 2020. So I know, it was like the worst possible timing. So we were very excitedly talking about this tour and what it would look like and where I would go, and just getting started reaching out to different booksellers. And so that was another reason I chose San Francisco, because who wouldn't want to drive up the coast from San Francisco? I thought, not only will I get to promote my book, but I'll get to see beautiful scenery and, you know, find some good restaurants. And so I was very excited about that. And it completely shut down by probably the end of February. It was pretty clear that nothing was going to happen, and you can't plan anything. And so that sort of fell by the wayside. I still want to do it. I still want to go, but maybe not for this book. Maybe for my next book, which is called Sugar and Salt. That's the one about the bakery and about the interloping barbecue place that moves in next door called Salt. It's kind of a Romeo and Juliet story.
Okay, well, we want to hear more about that. But before we go on to what's coming up, can you discuss the covers and sort of the process of, were you involved? Were you not involved? This is hardcover. This is paperback. And there's actually a beautiful UK cover as well, which I don't have a copy of right here, but.
Here's, I found you.
Oh, there we go.
That's me and my
wow. That's awesome. I love it.
I know. I was such a, you know, cover art is such a tricky thing, because it's a piece of commercial art that has like a nanosecond to tell the reader what she needs to know about this book. And a really good cover can be a real boost. A neutral cover, you know, you know, cross your fingers and hope for the best. And I've actually had books sales suffer from a poorly executed cover or a poorly conceived cover, and you don't always know. And so the way the process works now, thank goodness for digital art, because now we can zap pictures back and forth. And so my editor will go to the creative art department and tell them, here's a little thumbnail, what the book is about, and here's the setting, and, you know, here's the mood that we want. And they'll come up with several concepts, and then we'll look at those together. And so the Lost and Found Bookshop was not an instant slam dunk. They tried books that are stacked, and they tried kind of hearts and flowers, and and we really struggled to make it look as interesting but also a clean, clear message to the reader. And it sounds really simple, but when you start trying to render that in a piece of art, it can be really challenging. And so, but luckily, finally, this one came. Another thing that happened is they try to build on a previous look that worked. So the previous year I had a book that had like the white background and this iconic picture. It was a red spool of thread. And so they were able to build on that. And so they went back to that look, and they gave it a lot of thought. And I love how it came out. And there are little more Easter eggs on the cover. Like there's a big storyline in the book about a very, very rare edition of an Audubon book by John James Audubon, and there's a little bird on the spines of the book, and there's birds on the girl's dress, and so we kind of had fun with that. So after they pick, what the concept that they want to go with, then they sort of refine it and make it beautiful and play with color, and I pray that I don't have to have my picture taken one more time. Like, no. Never my favorite thing is having my picture made. I call my author photo my greatest work of fiction.
Your author photos are beautiful. I look, you have a few online.
They are. But yeah, honestly, if you look at my Twitter profile, I think my top pinned tweet that has like the top clicks or whatever is a picture of me actually writing next to a picture of me that says how I want you to think I look when I'm writing, and I'm looking very smart and
well, your
together.
pictures are very true to life. Like looking at you now, you look very much like your photo.
That's
if
very
you were
kind
on,
of you, but yeah.
if you were on a dating app, they wouldn't be disappointed.
Oh gosh, I was on a dating app years ago, like 10 plus years ago when I was single. My daughter, who's a marketing expert, she was very insistent. She was like, you got to do a dating app. And it's a very interesting, it's an interesting process. And I don't really think of that, it's been years for me now, but I've watched friends and people I know use them. I think it's a meeting app. Not really, you never know until you meet someone. And I ultimately didn't meet anybody on it, but no, my husband is my favorite husband, who Jerry is, we met through a friend. So old fashioned way, but they're definitely, and it's kind of part of the process now.
It is. It's absolutely part of the process. If people have like significant others that they didn't meet online, you're like, oh, really?
Yeah. I know now it's not how did you meet, it's what app did you use? Yeah. And I kind of love that, but yeah, it's a new dynamic, isn't it? But so many of us that don't expose us to getting out there and meeting people, that it makes perfect sense. It doesn't always work out, but it's a way to find a pool of options, I guess.
All right. Just to talk about your process a little bit. When do you write? Late at night, early in the morning? Has it changed over the years?
It definitely has changed because, as I mentioned before, it was, writing had to fit in around a teaching job and raising my daughter. And so that was like evenings from 9 to midnight, and weekends and summers. And so, but now that I'm a full-time writer, it's pretty much a full-time job. Anybody that goes, I try to go to it in the morning. In my head, it might be just from the couch to the computer or something, but definitely a 40 to 60 hour work week for me. Oh, wow. And I try to be really consistent and really steady about it, because in addition to writing, you're definitely an independent contractor. And so you do have to do things that have nothing to do with creativity and writing. You do bookkeeping, and you have to manage your career and work with your literary agent and things like that. So there are peripheral things that also happen, and that is not my favorite part, but this is my favorite career, so I'm going to give it my all. And right now I have a really, really hard deadline, because there's a there's a date that I'm getting something called a sensitivity reader. Have you heard of that?
Mhm.
A sensitivity reader is somebody who, a freelancer. Actually, you or some of your readers might have to look into this, because you read books for to make sure that cultural sensitivity has
Ah,
been attended to. And there's an interracial romance in the book that I'm writing right now, and there are people of color and people from different cultures. And in fact, I had a sensitivity reader for the Lost and Found Bookshop because of the Chinese American angle. I wanted to make sure that the language was correct, and it's something I so appreciate that my publisher is able to do, but they get scheduled up. So I have to get this book ready for the sensitivity reader, and so I'm kind of working overtime right now. So thank you for this break in my day. This is so nice. You're like the first real person I've spoken with.
so is this for the book you're ready? Sugar, it was sugar
Sugar
and
and
salt,
salt.
right?
I'm hoping I can keep that title. The publisher ultimately has the ultimate say over what the book title is going to be. I really like it. It sounds cool to me. I think they could give it a really cool artwork. So, but we're just at the beginning of that process. But at the moment, it's called Sugar and Salt, and it's going to be published on January 12th, I think, of 2022.
All right.
And there's been one in-person appearance that's been scheduled. It's in Naples, Florida
Oh,
in
that's
February.
exciting.
I think it might happen. We'll see.
Very good.
Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about what that's about? Are you allowed?
Yeah. I don't have an ending yet. I'm actually writing that today. I hope. It's an interracial romance, as I mentioned, but the bakery across the street from the Lost and Found Bookshop is called Sugar, and it's kind of a neighborhood institution. Everybody's gone there for years, since the 70s, and the owner is a very hunky, awesome guy named Jerome Sugar, and he's divorced and has a couple kids. And along comes this hot young gal from Texas with her bare legs and her cowboy boots and her tight skirt. And it turns out she is a barbecue goddess, and she wants to open a Texas style barbecue called Salt next door to Sugar. And they kind of there's some tension around that. She's definitely a woman with a huge past. Like, that's the thing that's probably going to sell this book, and our people are going to go, oh my God, why did you leave Texas? Oh my God, what? So anyway, that's happening, and hopefully coming to a happy ending this week. Sugar and Salt.
Well, good luck with that.
Wow, thank you. I write my first drafts in longhand in notebooks, because it just it's much more I don't know, feels more permanent, and it makes me commit more to the story if I don't have a delete button. And so I do my first draft, and I just I wrote the first draft of Sugar and Salt so fast, in like 8 weeks, 10 weeks maybe. And I had a story. It was like, oh my God, it's alive. But at that point, that's when I really have to turn, my big mess into a novel. And so I've been doing that for like the last 4 months.
Oh my goodness. So before we end, I just want to ask you a couple of questions about yourself, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure.
We covered this a little bit in your bio, but if you're not writing, what are you doing?
I have a lot of family things going on. I mentioned my 90-year-old mom lives with us. And so we have, I do most of the caregiving, but we have people coming and going about that. I'm married to Jerry, who's fantastic. I'm sure he's all over my social media, because he's so adorable, and I just adore him. And he's so creative that he has a studio on our property where he makes all kinds of things. He designs garments, like high-end outdoor wear, and he does it for clients. That he's a freelance designer, and he's a home renovator. So we have a lot of fun. I used to love to travel. When the pandemic began, I was in Vietnam.
Wow.
Yeah, I was on a tour in Vietnam, and they were definitely being cautious there and taking our temperature, but we didn't really think much of it. So I love to travel, but mostly I love to read, garden. I'm a cyclist. In the winter, I ski. I think I mentioned I'm a horrible, horrible golfer. I used to sit in the hot tub and talk on the phone to my mother, but she's here now, so I just kind of mosey over to her part. So yeah. Life is really nice. We live on the water. We live on a lovely stretch of beach on the island, and it's just very inspiring to be here. We get around by boat when the weather permits, and I feel really lucky to be in this spot. I love going online and talking to readers. I could get sucked in. It's a real time sink. And so I do get some help with that. So sometimes if people like message me online and they get a reply that sounds very canned or something like that, it's because I'm probably working and not personally responding to things. But I love doing that. I love seeing what people are talking about. Sometimes I knit stuff. I have a lot of interests. We did the only place that we've been in the last year and a half is we did have a trip to Hawaii,
Oh.
and we brought home a ukulele, and so
Ah.
now I know now if you've ever picked up a ukulele, it's very addictive to especially when you take your YouTube lesson. So I've been doing that.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. My very last question for you today is, what are you reading now, or what books do you recommend that we pick up? Because we're always looking for great books.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Right now I'm reading, you're going to hate me. John Grisham, A Time Justice or something like that. It's a legal thriller. And I hadn't read a John Grisham book in a long time. And from the point of view of craft, I love to sort of do a deep dive into another writer's work and say, why am I turning the pages like this? What is grabbing me or not grabbing me about this book? And so I'm reading a John Grisham book right now. One book that I've been recommending to so many friends is called the Dictionary of Lost Words. I'm kind of drawn to the things that are lost. She's an Australian author, and this is her first North American publication. And it's about how the dictionary has sort of, when it evolved through history, it's sort of, it's kind of a subversive feminist book that I've been enjoying too. And I'm reading a nonfiction memoir called Tangled Up in Blue. And it's about, and I thought it was timely to read, it's about a woman who, she doesn't go undercover as a cop. She becomes a citizen cop and takes this training in Washington, D.C. just to see what it's like to be a cop. And to find out, because obviously there's a lot of drama around, cops and things like that. And so I'm reading this memoir called Tangled Up in Blue, and it's pretty hard hitting in places too.
All right. Well, very good. Thank you so much again for your time. And I urge everybody to get out and get either the hardcover or the paperback, which again comes out on June 1st. And yes, thank you so much, Susan. And we look forward to your next book for sure.
Erin, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much. You have a wonderful rest of your week.
You too. Take care.
All right. Bye for now.